going to be a fun segment, so I'm going to warn everybody out there right now. This may be our most fun segment of the week. I got a guy coming on the program right now that I've known for 30 years. I knew him as the music promotion guy at Geffen Records in the 1980s when I was the rock and roll critic, when I was the Cameron Crowe almost famous guy at the Evening Sun and running around backstage at Hammerjacks, amongst other places. He first introduced me to Steven Tyler and Aerosmith, introduced me to Don Henley, and told me I should probably stay away from the Guns N' Roses guys. He is Fred Traub. Freddie, I don't know how to properly put into context our relationship. You have been a beer vendor at Camden Yards. You've been a music executive for 30 years. You've been a concert promoter, a music promoter. But I know you as my friend forever and in many different ways, and we've run into each other, and we've bunked together at the 93 World Series in New Jersey. But more than that, you went to Rio with your boy last week and the last couple of weeks, and I've seen your pictures on Facebook, and I said, you know what? I'm going to bring Freddie on here just to talk about Rio, but I know it's going to lead back to Guns N' Roses and the Orioles and your affinity for the Ravens and all of that other good stuff. Welcome in from Connecticut this morning. How are you? How's life after Rio? You didn't get Zeke or anything, right?
Oh no! You know what? It's the culture that we live in now. It's the strangest thing that people always look for negativity and nonsense. I mean, the whole Ryan Lochte knucklehead stuff and all the coverage that's getting. I mean, Zika was a non-factor. I mean, my wife had all this camping stuff packed in our bags, and she was scared. I mean, meanwhile, it was 50 degrees at night in Rio. So I mean, I didn't see a mosquito the entire time that I was there. It was a joke.
Okay, so give me first off, tell everybody what you do. You are famous to Baltimore people, and they don't know it yet, but I'm about to tell them. You were the creator, really, and the one that got Who Let the Dogs Out played in our stadium. It's what you do. You get music played in stadiums and promote bands between music. You are literally the music and sports link of all music and sports links, but you wound up in Rio, but your background is in music and sports, yes?
Correct. I mean, I started my career in sports as a 14-year-old soda vendor at New York Mets games in 1978 in New York City, and then moved on to work at Madison Square Garden and the Jets and the Giants. And I always loved music, and I happened just to, in the happenstance, met an executive from Atlantic Records named Danny Bush in the early 1980s, and that's really what I wanted to do with my life. And he got me an internship at Atlantic Records, and I still always kept my foot in the sports world, particularly with my vending career. And they loved having the relationships. I mean, I worked as a clubhouse attendant for Charlie Samuels in the New York Mets during '84, '85, and '86. So I would bring these record executives, autographed Darryl Strawberry bats and Kevin McReynolds jerseys. So it kind of helped me, separate myself from all the other kids that were looking for a record career job, because they all loved the fact that I was, a sports guy. So it made a difference, and I always kept those relationships because I love both of those disciplines. And really, what I do now is really link the two of them. And it's no secret now that trying to connect with an audience and get people excited about music, and not even downloading but even streaming now. Music is much more ephemeral than it was when you and I were kids, and we'd have pictures of Led Zeppelin on our walls.
Yeah, you had to go somewhere, right, to get music. You had to go to that special spot around the corner somewhere to buy an album, right? You're a little older than me, so, I mean, that was the experience in the early 70s, right? And then it became Tower Records and whatever. But I find an interesting part of this, and I do want to get to Rio, because I think we might stay on the line here now. We may do 3 segments before it's all over. In the old days, I would just have you come into the studio and sit up for 2 hours and put your feet up, and we'd sit there and we'd sit there
I'm in Virginia today.
Yeah, we'd sit there and shoot the cheese for hours on end with an open microphone. And I know you're a talker, I'm a talker. I find it fascinating that back in the 1980s, Fred, and maybe you went out to Nassau Coliseum and saw the New York Arrows play, or saw Steve Jungle play. But indoor soccer was this bizarre thing where they played disco music and rock and roll music when the ball was in play. And my father and me, to some degree, could not get over like, why are you playing music during the game? That's not cool. Like, not that it's golf, not that it's tennis, but there was some sort of sanctimonious nature to it now. Now there's not a stadium in the world you would go into where songs are not sung by the fans themselves, if it's ole, 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 or whether it's that goofy White Stripes thing that I hate so much that we do here, or whether it was Rock and Roll Part 2, or whether it's doing the YMCA. Music and stadiums, 30 years later, it's part of the vehicle. It's part of the memory. It's part of the song wrapped around Jim Palmer and Barbra Streisand on his last ride, and these one moment in time with Cal Ripken and Who Let the Dogs Out with the first Ravens and that goofy White Stripes song with the second Ravens. And it's 30 years ago, it was seen as blasphemous, Fred, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we live in a culture now where it's an immersive entertainment experience. And I have a very, very dear friend of mine who's the executive vice president of the New York Mets, David Newman. And I met David Newman back with the Baja Men when the Ravens made the Super Bowl in 2000. He was my main NFL contact. We had the Baja Men come down. We did a big event for the Ravens and the NFL experience, the Thursday before the Super Bowl, and David was my contact, and David is now with the New York Mets. And when he took the job with the New York Mets, I was excited because I was like, wow, so now like the Yankees are your competitor, because he was always a maniacal Yankee fan. And he laughed and he said, you know what, friend, the Yankees really aren't so much my competitor as the internet is, as 1,000 television channels, getting people out of their house and making an experience at the ballpark, which is not an inexpensive experience. Really, that's really what my goal is, to encourage people to come out to the ballpark and have a good time. I can't control whether or not the team wins or loses on the field, but I can control if people thought it was a value investment for their time as well as their money. So because of that, they want people to have, an immersive entertainment experience. So that means enjoying the music, enjoying the concessions, which will, bring me to where I am in Rio. That in Rio, being, walking this earth here now for 53 years and being involved in professional and collegiate sports since I was 14, seeing what was in Rio was just, an eye-opener for me. Because all of the bells and whistles, all of the stuff in the venues, and I went to 17 different Olympic events. All the video boards, the music.
And you went as a fan primarily, right, Fred? I mean, you didn't go wearing a suit and tie. I mean, I've seen you in that environment at Super Bowls and where you're really working with a credential and your hair's all done up. And, you're working. It is what it is. I saw you down there literally as if you had gotten 2 more tickets and my wife was healthier, we could have just sort of tagged along as long as you buy the tickets, right? And just you were literally down on the Today Show set being the goofy fan waving the flag, literally. I mean, had you ever been to an Olympics? Were you around in 84 or 96 or any of that stuff?
I went to the closing ceremonies in Los Angeles in 84.
Okay.
I worked with Clancy and Howard and all the Baltimore vendors in 96 at the Olympics in Atlanta, which was absolutely spectacular. I was at the London Games in 2012, and then now obviously this.
Okay, so you have something to compare it to. So you say Rio was different. Set me straight on it, Freddie. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, as strange as it may sound, the Brazilians don't have a lot of experience in, quote, doing big events, close quote. And that's, aside from the Pan American Games in 2000 and aside from the World Cup 2 years ago, they don't have an infrastructure there to host and create big events within the seating confines of the stadiums. That's why they brought in Mike Bonner from the Denver Broncos, and they brought in Rodney White from the Atlanta Falcons, and they brought in Steve Johnson from Kroenke Sports and the Avalanche and the Nuggets to run all the entertainment packages. So the video, the ribbon boards, there's no sponsorship involved.
So the Olympic experience essentially becomes sort of an American entertainment experience,
Absolutely.
Right? Because I went to the World Cup in 06, and Fred, the thing that struck me, and a short story long, but my wife's donor, the man who saved her life, and we're going 2 weeks from now, lives 7 miles from the Dortmund Stadium where we saw Trinidad and Sweden play in the 06 World Cup, and he lives about 20 miles from Gelsenkirchen where the U.S. got their asses kicked by Czech Republic in the kickoff game in 06. So we've been in both of those stadia in Germany, and the first thing that stands out to you, and by the way, our German kid, we email back and forth. We're bringing him over for an American sports. He loves the NBA, he loves the NFL. He's 24 years old. He doesn't know what tailgating is. He didn't know. He didn't know the reference. He didn't understand like why people would sit in their cars in the parking lot and drink beer or have food before a game. That's not the way it's done there. And the other part of it is the hospitality, skybox mentality of everything from the Staples Center and the Verizon centers and the Wells Fargo centers to the football stadiums like Santa Clara where half the place is a skybox. Those stadia in Europe don't have that kind of an experience. So if it was a European sports experience that was brought to Rio, it would feel a lot different than a Denver Nuggets game is going to feel, right?
Oh, well, absolutely. And I think, I think the 1% is much larger here in the United States than it is around the world. And I think the corporate support of the event is much larger here in the United States than it is in the world. I mean, I actually, I have a friend of mine who does a lot of travel and tourism and, entertainment marketing, and he's a ticket broker, and I was asking him about the suites. We were at opening ceremonies. We were looking at the suites, and I said, hey, Ram, what are the suites like here? And he goes, I've been in them. They're very, very Spartan. No private bathrooms, no, chafing dishes and food. Basically, all it is just a room with 4 walls and seats, And
when the executive of GE has been sitting in MetLife Center, right, watching Springsteen in a leather chair with filet mignon and dancing girls and flambe, it's a little bit of a downer when you go to the Olympics and that stuff's not there, right?
Oh, well, I'll give you an even better story. So the opening ceremonies, what was that, 2 weeks ago, last Friday night, my son and I had Category C tickets. So we were, up a little bit. I mean, there really wasn't a bad seat in Maracana Stadium. It's a terrific facility to watch an event. But, we saw, like, on the lower bowl, we saw, like, a whole row that was open. So I said, you know what? Right when the lights went out, I said, let's take a shot and see if we can walk down with a buddy of mine and see if we can get a little closer. When they come and kick us out, we'll go back to our seats, no harm, no foul. So we walked down, and there was a white-haired guy. There was 6 seats, all empty. There was a white-haired guy sitting on the seat all the way in. So it was seats 1 to 5, seat number 1 being on the aisle, and he was number 6 in. So my son and I and my buddy Ram, we just flopped in those seats, and the white-haired guy was American, and he had a credential on him, and he looked at us, and I was wearing a suit and tie, and I think I had a Team USA hat on, so he recognized we were Americans, and he extended his hand and says, hey, just so you guys know, these are my seats. My guests aren't here. But if you want to, watch, the beginning of the ceremonies with me, and then when my guests finally show, you'll have to go back to your other seats. Is that okay? And I was like, absolutely. And I'm staring at his face and said, I recognize this guy. And then it hit me like a sledgehammer. It was Warren Buffett.
So you watched the opening ceremonies with Warren Buffett?
Yeah, I watched the opening ceremonies with Warren Buffett.
Well, I don't know where you were when the guy from Tonga came in all oiled up, but, I was seeing your pictures in real time from the event while on that Friday night I was watching the opening ceremonies. And
technology is amazing now, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is incredible. I mean, I'm seeing your pictures in the morning. I'm having a coffee. I'm sitting here doing radio, and I'm looking at my Facebook, and, there's Fred on the beach with Fred, Roker, and my wife has it on in the living room, and I come back here, and you're standing there, and I'm sitting here talking to Luke about the Orioles or whatever. And, I don't want to say I was jealous, envious, any of that. I'll just say this, Fred. You didn't get to watch it on TV. My wife has not had it off. I mean, I'm not kidding you. There has not been a moment since it's begun. 2.5 weeks of it, every minute of every day. It's some water polo, rowing, volleyball, beach volleyball, hot chicks, big dudes, weightlifter. I mean, I've seen it all. Blowout basketball games. So we've had a lot of Olympics on around here. And I'll say this about Rio. I went in 2006. I went on a very momentous time there. At the beginning of Carnival, the Stones played the beach there on Copacabana for 2 million people.
Which I thought, I walked Copacabana Beach every single day for 2 weeks, and I thought about that Stones concert the whole time I was there.
It's on DVD. You can Google it and check it out and see what it looked like on the beach there. But it was one of the most incredible humanity things I've ever I've never been anywhere where 2 million people are standing in the same place at the same time.
That's amazing.
And I'm not making that number up. And we all know what 100,000 or 75,000 looks like. We know what the parade in Baltimore, when there might have been 300,000 or 400,000 people in the streets. We know what that looks like. Now times that by 5 and put them all on a beach and try to figure out how to get them out of there once Mick is done singing Satisfaction. But either way, we felt it to be very dodgy, very celebratory. We didn't ever feel really safe, but we never really felt threatened. But we never got off the beaten path. I didn't go into the whorehouses at 3 a.m. I wasn't up in the hills. I didn't go into the favelas looking to buy cocaine. We went up to Corcovado in daylight. We took our pictures. We ate at one of the steakhouses.
Spectacular, by the way. One of the most spectacular vistas I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, if you want to know why to go to Rio, go up to Corcovado and stand there, and you tell me that the flight's too far, right?
Oh yeah, there's certain pilgrimage that you make. Like, if you're a music fan, you want to go see Abbey Road, where the Beatles walked in London. In New York City, you go to the Empire State Building. In Rio, when you get off the plane and it's a sunny day, you got to go to Corcovado. Corcovado and Sugarloaf are just absolutely spectacular vistas.
Now the water, and the journalism that goes into this. You were a fan, so if I'm playing NBC reporter with Fred Traub, Sports Fred, and I say, yeah, you went to Rio as a fan. What was your experience, Freddie? I've seen all of these pictures. It looked like an incredibly joyful, memorable, legendary thing for you and your son. And my dear friend Dave Rather, who owns Mothers here locally, was also down in Rio all week with his family, and I've seen his pictures. He didn't post as much as you, but I know he's going to have a million pictures he's going to post, and I'm going to get him on next week and talk about his journey. And so give me your journey as a fan and why you went and when you decided to go. Clearly you spent a lot of money. It's not cheap to do, right?
Well, the one saving grace is, the U.S. dollar against the real is very, very, very good. So it's basically 3 reals for every $1. And you know what? I'm not an Uber guy. Even though I work and I live part-time in New York City, I very rarely use Uber. But I was using Uber all the time in Rio because you could literally be in a car for an hour and the Uber bill would be $6. So what we would do is Baja, which is where Olympic Park is. There were 3 separate venues for the Olympics. There was Maracana area where the opening ceremony stadium is and also where they did the track and field. There was Diodoro, which is where whitewater rafting was, and equestrian, which I never made it up to, and then Baja, which was the main Olympic park where swimming was, tennis, basketball, diving, weightlifting, boxing, all of that was in Baja. And literally from Copacabana or Ipanema, which is where the Team USA headquarters was at, which I could consult for Team USA. I handled their music relationships, so I would spend most of my time at Olympic headquarters in Ipanema. So from Baja to Ipanema or Copacabana, just closing the door of your hotel and walking out, and then before your butt is actually sitting in seats at an event, I want to say was a good 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and that's by taking mass transit. That's walking 10 minutes to the train station, getting on the train, taking to the last stop, and transferring onto the Olympic line.
So if you had a ticket for a noon event, you really kind of got to get moving at 7:30 in the morning, kind of, sort of, right?
Probably, yeah. You got to be out your door by 9:30 or 10, sure. The saving grace would be at night sometimes. And if you were going out to Baja, you would want to have, tickets for 3 or 4 or 5 different events because you're so far out there, and then you can bounce. All right, I'm going to do basketball at 7 o'clock. I'm going to do at 1900 hours. I'm going to do table tennis. Or I'm going to do weightlifting. So you can bounce around from event to event in Baja, and then at the end of the night, I would try and grab an Uber, and then I would have it take me right to the USA house where I thought I'd be able to get a cold drink and some food, simply because the concessions at these Olympic venues was absolutely atrocious. The first day of the Olympics, that Saturday after opening ceremonies, there were 4-hour waits to get a cold water or a Coke. And you're talking about temperatures 105 degrees, 110 degrees. Because the Brazilians have no idea, as I said earlier, about big events. So they didn't have they had people doing concessions, but it wasn't like Aramark. It wasn't like, the concession companies here that really know what they're doing for a living. So you'd have to wait in line for an hour, hour and a half to pay your money, and then they'd give you a ticket. Then you'd have to go away on a separate line to actually pick up your product. It was totally
so there really were some parts of this that were third world from and not just you being a pampered American, just something that would be the level of expectation, right?
You can't run events like that operationally. It's unacceptable to put people through that. And then once if you were looking at food, I mean, you had hamburgers. Like here, as Raven fans, you're on the club level at the M&T Stadium or even on the lower. We probably have 300 different, meal items that we can sell you, from hot dogs to Subway sandwiches to whatever have you. There was something called a Fuego, which was a cold chicken sandwich, a cheeseburger, peanuts, and popcorn. That was it. That was all they offered.
Well, and again, they're not in the business of doing this. They're 4 months
Correct.
from now, they're not having swimming meets where 40,000 people show up. The whole notion that they had the games there, Fred, a mistake or no? I mean, given the water, given the politics, given the money, I look at it from the outside as a thinking, rational human being in 2016 that isn't fanboy anymore, that understands that some fat cats, usually old white guys, are making a whole lot of money off of this, and the corruption that's going on all over the world, and the corruption that really led to these games even winding up there. That place is really going to be a mess a month from now once all of this clears out and all the trucks go home, because the lasting impact of it being there, and especially how many empty seats I saw everywhere, how much space there was on the beach for you everywhere. Nothing felt full to me. Nothing felt robust, and it felt like the only one that's going to go down there and leave money, Fred, are guys like you and people way more wealthy than you going down there and doing the skybox thing and staying at a high-end hotel and buying meals. But once that money, it feels to me like not a lot of that kind of money came down there.
Stadium that the U.S. Open uses each event, and now they're just going to sit there and rot. And it just, HBO did an amazing piece on Inside Sports.
It was incredible. It wasn't when they showed that Greek baseball stadium in Athens where they don't play baseball. It's unbelievable, right?
Well, I mean, and people think the National Football League and Major League Baseball, I mean, they're businesses, okay? And they're going to be going on for many, many years. Baseball's been around 100 years. National Football League is approaching 100 years. They'll be going on long after you and I are gone. But, when you talk about the IOC and FIFA, and I have to be careful how I frame this, because I have a very good relationship with the USOC and I consult their music, but it's almost like you could argue that they are criminal cartels. That, the National Football League is probably jealous of the IOC because, so they get the municipalities to build them the stadiums for free, but they still have to pay their players. So not only does the IOC get the municipalities to build their stadiums for free, but they don't have to pay their players.
Well, I mean, that's a real story.
Pure profit.
Well, the story for Rio, and somewhere between the jingoism of nationalism, business, sports, power, influence, and then the word corruption, right? Like, that's the next thing that happens in a place like Brazil where everyone had their panties in a bunch. There was such nationalism and green and gold, flag flying and Pele. Oh, my God, we've arrived. We're important. We're somebody. We've got the World Cup. We've got the Olympics. We are now London. We're like London. We're like Paris. We're like Tokyo. We're like, no, you're not. You don't have running water, for Christ's sake. You know what I mean? And you're still not going to have it after these nationalistic displays of opening ceremonies and these incredibly gorgeous shots of Rio de Janeiro and NBC, right? So,
these games were made for NBC, but what is criminal, I was telling friends of mine, we would have lunch there at one of these Anthony Bourdain hole-in-the-wall chicken places, which was fabulous. Is that, for NBC and the broadcast partners, it's a made-for-television event. Maybe that's why he was there. But when you get under, when you dig underneath it a little bit, it's like, well, the ocean is poisonous. The statistics that we have a certain number, a level of a number when you talk about bacteria and viruses in water. That if there's a big bad rainstorm in the West Coast or Hawaii, they'll close the beaches because of sewage overflow. And there's a certain number, and at that certain number, they'll close the beaches. That number in Brazil, in Rio, is exceeded by 1.5 billion with a B. Billion. So for me, walking by, the Today Show and looking at that, and I love the beach. I'm a Jimmy Buffett guy. I love going to Hawaii for Pro Bowl. I just love the ocean. And I just felt so horrible that here was this beautiful water, just spectacular ocean, and I couldn't get near it.
Well, right. And that's the point behind all of this, and that was the point behind the journalism of what HBO went through, and I think what a lot of journalists went through. Anything you want to say on the Lochte thing, in retrospect on all of it, and to me, I went through this a little bit with Dennis Kolatzis last week. We had a conversation about Michael Phelps being, a dolphin in the pool, but a really, really sad, maladjusted human being out of the pool. And I think for a lot of these athletes, they put so much into this. They get their 5 minutes of fame every 4 years, and they have to win gold medals to do it. I think there's something that they're not prepared for in a lot of ways. And the Lochte story, to me, it isn't about a dumbass American, although it is. And it isn't about privilege, but it is. It really is about maladjusted human beings because they spend 14 hours a day in the pool and very little out of the pool adjusting to what fame is going to be like in the 5 minutes that spotlight shines on them.
Well, I love Phelps simply because I love having a celebrity Raven fan, and he really, really loves the Ravens. He's very close with Lisa Dixon, who's the assistant to Dick Cass, and he does a lot of stuff with the team. He was on the field when the Ravens beat the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, so he really wears his Ravens on his sleeve, which is why I was wearing my Ravens jersey throughout Rio every time I would go to his race to sort of give the support. I think I posted something on Facebook when, I think there was a reporter that asked him a question that he was wearing a Steelers hat or a Steelers jersey, and Michael Phelps refused to talk to him. So I like that about his persona. So I will never say anything bad about Michael Phelps or say anything untoward to him. But Ryan Lochte, maybe this is all something that he's crafted. People think Kim Kardashian is an idiot. She's not. She's very, very smart. She's cultivated this character that's made her millions of dollars. So a guy like Ryan Lochte, everybody's talking about him right now, like what a piece of crap he is, and he crapped all over Rio. But everybody's talking about Ryan Lochte, and they're not talking about Michael Phelps.
Well, right, and I think that part of making the story up on that Sunday morning was, I'm going to make myself the news story today. Phelps has got a bunch of, that is it's, first off, and I would say this, and you spent, 2 weeks down there. By the way, Fred Traubon, my longtime sports and music executive pal who went to the Olympics for a couple of weeks as a fan with his son. I said this last week when it happened. I said, well, if he's lying to get attention over Phelps, that's stupid, but it's equally stupid that you were on the wrong side of the tracks at Rio at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, if you got mugged away from the scene at 4 o'clock in the morning in Rio, Fred, didn't you get what you deserved if that happened to you?
Oh, yeah. Listen, the first 2 nights that I was there, my son and I went, we met some friends, and we went down. Literally, I was scared cracked. I know it had no basis in reality, but I felt like
it is an intimidating place. It really is.
I felt that I was in downtown Aleppo, Syria, and I'm like watching out for ISIS, or I'm in Fallujah. That's how scared I was, and that's how the media made me scared. But by the end of the 2 weeks, though, I was taking the train. I grew up in New York City in the '70s, so I can kind of hold my own. But at the same time, would I be out walking in a favela at 4 a.m. in Rio de Janeiro? Of course not. I'm not that dumb. And I had American security with me, and I had Brazilian drivers with me, and I would ask them questions about the favelas. And I actually went through a bunch of favelas, and by design, and sometimes not by design. And I asked some of the guys that, and I said, well, because they'll come after you not because they're looking to target Americans. They're not ISIS or Al Qaeda. It's just that they don't know who you are. And apparently these favelas have warlords, and they raid each other all the time. So they're not sure if you're working for a warlord or something, so they're going to hit you first before you hit them.
Nice. Welcome to life in Rio. But you made it back in one piece. Great experience, Fred, for you and your boy.
Absolutely, my friend. I'm happy that I did it, and now I'm looking forward to Tokyo in 2020.
Hey, a favorite part? Just give me one thing. Beach volleyball, swimming. I mean, what when you take one memory, which other than standing a Corcovado, which I think, and no one will ever do that without remembering that. But from the sports perspective.
Well, one interesting sport was handball. I thought handball was a cool sport to see. I'd never seen that before, but obviously being a Baltimore fan, and I'm on a Baltimore radio station, I would have to say it was all of Michael Phelps' races.
So you were there for all of them?
Correct.
That's awesome, dude. That's pretty good memory. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for all that you do for us here and over the years, and support of my wife. Sort of legendarily, you showed up at the hospital, and we couldn't even let you in. But
of course,
love you, appreciate you. Keep those great pictures coming, man. I tell everybody, if you think you're bragging on Facebook, go ahead and brag away. If you're somewhere that's interesting to you and you're having a great time, if I like you at all, I want to see those pictures. And it gave me a little vicarious feeling about being there through you, through Dave Rather, and a handful of other journalists, Dave Sheinin, my pal. I had Gary Washburn was down there covering a basketball team, so I had a bunch of Facebook friends putting pictures, and then the media as well, which is also cool. Christine Brennan, I was following through all the Ryan Lochte stuff, but it was a good couple of weeks, very memorable, and for me and my wife, it never went off the TV. I'll always remember the Rio Olympics because I saw a lot of it.
Well, your wife is exactly the demo that they were looking to serve, so it makes sense.
Oh, she's laughed, she's cried, she's dived, she's rode, she's cheered, she's spiked, she's set. Yeah, she's been doing it all, man.
Well, that's the power of sports.
Brings us all together now, doesn't it? And when that doesn't do it, it's the music, right?
Absolutely.
He is Fred Traub. We call him Sports Fred. You know him from the Who Let the Dogs Out guys. He's been promoting bands and bringing sports and music production together for many, many years, and I know him as a longtime Geffen music rep back in the 80s. He was down in Rio. Fred Traub, that's Traube, and you can find him. He's a good man and a huge Ravens fan as well, and a longtime local dude here. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We come in crystal clear from wherever you are. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. WNST Towson programming together here and some deeper conversations with some pals now that summer's here, and we're kind of into the pennant race and certainly the Olympics now in the books for the most part. And, I thought it'd be a good time to bring Chris Pica back onto the program. And, Chris, I reached to you, and I said, hey, let's do some radio in a couple days. You're like, yeah, sure. And I said, what are we going to talk about? Because you always sort of green room me in that way. And I think I text you back something like, I'm sure someone will do something stupid to give us something to talk about in the sports space. And lo and behold, Ryan Lochte just, rolls right on in for us. Right, Chris?
Yeah, that was... I don't know if I would have picked him. I figured it would have been some NFL player or something like that. I don't think I would have picked a U.S. swimmer to do that, but he certainly fits that bill.
Yeah. All right. You've done a lot of PR. I mean, first off, background, Chris is my friend, my first media friend. I met him when I walked into the Baltimore News-American in January of 1984 on the eve of the 84 Olympics. You may have been literally at my side, and I think you were, when I got my first ever byline. It was August 1st of 1984. I had my first byline. It was an Olympic-related story. It was on Teresa Andrews. You may have been the guy who said to me, you were Tom Robinson, call over to the North Baltimore Aquatic Swim Club and get a quote from Murray Stevens, right? So I go back with the Olympics to how I felt about it in '84 to where we are now, and I've known you all these years. You've worked in baseball, you've worked in football, you've worked in PR. Just when, you hear the O.J. Simpson story 30 years ago and your jaw drops and you these crazy stories and all the steroid stories and the cheating stories and scandal, this one's, I don't want to say it's an all-timer, but it's truly an international incident born of absolute drunkenness, stupidity, cover-up where there didn't need to be. It's really an embarrassment. I don't know if you're the PR guy on the Olympic Committee. Tell everybody how this thing works when everybody's trying to CYA, right?
Yeah, and to give you a little bit more background, I was honored to work at two international events when TBS had the Goodwill Games.
Sure.
Back in the 90s. I worked boxing and team handball in Seattle in 1990, and then I did beach volleyball in 1998.
Lucky you.
And you're around all these tremendous, international athletes in their different disciplines, and it's a completely different monster when you're working an event like that as opposed to, let's say, a Super Bowl or other events of that size, just because of the amount of international media you have. It's not just 100 U.S. people in a press box. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of journalists, and in this case, in the Olympics, thousands.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Lochte made himself the biggest story in the world, right? Literally, right? I mean,
right,
and that's hard to do.
Well, that's hard to do, and then I can only imagine, much like the phone call that the NFL PR guy gets at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. One of his guys gets busted for something or gets locked up. I'm sure that first call went to the U.S. swimming PR director, who immediately called the USOC, and then you've got to worry about the U.S. consulate because you're not in the country, and it's something that we talk to our student athletes at the Popeyes Bahamas Bowl about, that you're not in the United States. This is not U.S. laws do not apply. You are at the mercy of the local laws that are in place.
And respect those laws. That's not a difficult concept.
And there are subtle differences and there are major differences, and so.
But one of them in general is everyone in the world knows. But if you and I get stuck up at 4:00 in the morning at a gas station in Rio, Chris, it's probably our fault. I mean, you've traveled around the world. I've traveled around the world. We know what this is. You know the situation. It's not favorable in any light to be out at 4:00 in the morning in Rio, right?
No, it's I think it goes back to the Tony Dungy line. Nothing good ever happens after midnight, generally.
Yeah, well, it's just a bad decision. Sure. I mean, you've seen athletes make these decisions all the time.
It's a bad decision that got exponentially worse because for whatever reason, and again, I'm a big proponent of letting stories breathe, and what we knew in the first 12 hours of this story was not what we knew after 48 or 3 days or 4 days. This stuff just needs time to sort of hash out. No less than the Daily Mail in Britain had gotten a hold of video of those guys coming back to the Olympic Village after 7 a.m. They'd gotten a hold of security footage. Obviously, the footage was released from the gas station involved. So there were all these nuances that were going on. But the only thing that anyone knew for the first 12 hours was that 4 of our Olympic athletes had been held up at a gas station in Rio. No one was hurt except that they had lost their wallets and some money. And that was the story, and that was what got out, and that was shocking. And of course, Rio had been sort of a punching bag for the last several months with the water problems, with the high crime problems in the favelas, all of the stuff that was going on.
Well, how about the deposed president too? That would be part of it as well, right?
They had money problems. You're doing a major event there. HBO did a fairly large piece on the International Olympic Committee and how they choose Olympic cities. A lot of it's completely different. We'll get into that a little bit later. But Rio basically had been a punching bag prior to the games beginning. And so this incident, whatever it was at the time, thought to be something else, played into that narrative of Rio as an unsafe city. These are our Olympic hero, one Olympic hero, and other guys that participate on the team. This happened. So this suddenly just blows up beyond compare. And you don't tell the truth from the get-go to your mom or to anybody else for whatever reason that is. And only Ryan Lochte knows why he chose to tell the story that he told. And again, there's still some nuance to what happened at the station, too, as this story sort of broadens out. But ultimately, you force the USOC, who has enough to do, and they have a program that I interviewed with the USOC several years ago, and they talked about a program that they do at each games called Managing Victory. As soon as people medal in their particular sports, the next day they're taken around to NBC. They do the rounds. They do the car wash. NBC, their local media that's in Rio, national media that talk to them. And
that's the one day of their life someone's going to want to talk to them for a day, and then they have to go home and either go get another gold medal or have a parade in their hometown or go get a real job if you're a discus thrower or something that doesn't really translate into the real world, or onto a Wheaties box, right? I mean, other than these couple of girls that, on the balance beam and a couple of the swimmers, there's another 90, 100 people that medal there, not named Carmelo Anthony, right?
Right, and they're extremely important, as well as, let's say, whoever finishes 8th in the race with Usain Bolt in the 100-meter dash. He got to an Olympic final, and those athletes are important too. So the USOC that desperately wants to make sure that these people get the publicity for what they do and how hard they've worked, in some cases, for decades.
Right, and the 5 minutes to water polo is important,
correct.
Right? Yeah, sure.
Yep, it is, and it is for them. And so suddenly the story is not the medalist. It's not the success of the games so far, for the most part, and there have been problems there. But the actual games themselves, the actual competitions, have been their usual Olympic selves: tremendous competition, great moments, and the like. And the USOC and U.S. Swimming, you had a great meet with Katie Ledecky and Michael Phelps and everyone else that medaled. Now they're having to take care of something that's didn't happen in the pool. Didn't happen on the competition court. This is something that they're having to deal with.
This is real life. The police are involved, right? The federales are coming in. You got all that going on, right?
That's exactly right. You've got lawyers. You've got U.S. consulate, U.S. embassy. You've got all that going on instead of worrying about publicizing your medalists and publicizing your Olympians, and it's taking time away from that. And that's unfair, quite honestly, to the athletes that have worked really hard to get to this point, that maybe they receive a little bit less attention because of this. And it just sort of spiraled out of control because some lies were told, some, things were kind of, expanded probably beyond what actually happened. And it hurts everyone. And it's not a good look for the United States Olympic Committee. It's not a good look for U.S. Swimming. It's certainly not a good look for Ryan Lochte and the other swimmers involved. And it's a tough situation PR-wise to manage. And because you're probably saying, hey, you've got to come clean with this. And of course, Lochte's lawyer probably crafted the statement that came out late last week with Ryan basically, I'll say apologizing, but he left out a few key apologies, which was basically to his teammates who he threw under the bus and who were left back in Rio and pulled off of a plane as opposed to going home, to the people of Rio for what happened and for any vandalism that occurred. So it was sort of a kind of an apology, but really wasn't. So you've got all these competing things that are going on, and this is just taking a lot more time and a lot more energy than I think any of the parties would have preferred to expend on it.
Chris Pica is our guest, longtime worker in the public relations and the communication space in the National Football League and the Saints, Atlanta Falcons, and, of course, a Mount St. Joe Gale and a Loyola Greyhound locally as well. I want to talk about this with you because you've been around professional athletes and, you were with Michael Jordan famously with the Birmingham Barons who, had his own issues in dealing with fame and the loss of his father and the murder, the dark side of fame, I should say. And I think all of us, I was a kid growing up over in Colgate, dreaming of the stars and being around the stars and, being Howard Cosell or Oscar Madison or something like that one day myself. I've done this for a living and been around all this for a while, and I've seen certainly the dark side of all of it. But these swimmers are fascinating to me because I am no fan of Michael Phelps. I'm just, flat out. It was 2 miles from my radio station for 20 years, and we've never had him on. I've never been near him. Everyone I've ever dealt with around him has been difficult or sort of, I would use the word douchey. That would be the nice way of just saying nobody was sort of real. It was all these layers of agents and this and that, and I would always come back to this. We would always come back to this with Ray Bachman and everyone else. We'd say, he swims. If he doesn't want to come on the show, if he doesn't want to come on and talk about loving the Ravens, if he doesn't want to be, that guy, Okay, we'll just go talk to Ravens players, or I'll get Brian Billick on the show, or I don't want to have anybody on my radio show that doesn't want to be on my radio show, but a peculiar bird for sure, and then all of the out of the pool issues in and around his fame, his wealth, his largesse, his place in East Baltimore, and the legend of Michael Phelps in the nightlife in Baltimore, and then the drinking and driving. It seems like every time he would get out of the pool, he win a gold medal, and he's back in the news for doing bong hits at South Carolina or whatever, right? So, I start to get to the point after all of this and say it's very rare that there are guys like Joe Flacco that come through this thing and can come out the other side of it, and he's not on the other side of it. We would have said that about Ray Rice too, by the way. So, but it's very rare that people get through this thing with some sort of normalcy. I always watched how Brooks Robinson conducted himself and just thought, why can't everybody just be sort of normal like Brooks, right? But it doesn't. In the modern era, it's not normal. And the fame thing, and I know you know this from being around football players, athletes, some guys take it differently than other guys. And I think the football players, even if they don't handle it well, it's in their face all the time if they play at Clemson or Alabama, or if they're in the NFL for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and they've seen the guy down the locker get arrested for this or that or whatever the situation would be. But these swimmers, they just go away, and it's very obvious that they spend an inordinate amount of their lives and their childhood. I've compared it over the last week, Chris, to child actors and the problems that child actors would have adjusting to like life and real life in the grocery store when you become famous and you're Michael Phelps and you've got all this money and you weren't really good at handling people when you were 15. Then by the time you're 19, you're a bajillionaire and you're kind of an arrogant jerk. And Lochte is one who has always been overshadowed by Phelps, right? So the psychology of this in wanting to make a news story where there was none and then lying about it and still 10 days later being the biggest story in the world, there's something probably really Donald Trumpian perverse about just wanting, or George Steinbrenner just wanting to be the headline. I mean, it's weird because more people have talked about Ryan Lochte than, he just would have been another guy had he not done this. Now he's infamous, right? Which is the next best thing to being famous if you want to be famous, right?
Yeah, and the cycle's going to go away. By the time the Olympics, are faded from people's memories in a few weeks, it's going to be sort of a national joke. But Lochte goes back to sort of relative anonymity as a swimmer. I know he wants to make a run at 2020 in Tokyo.
And then what happens to his life, I guess, is my point. When all you've done is swim, my cousin would say that about tennis. She got on scholarship at Arizona and played, and the minute she had her last match, she put the tennis racket. I don't think she's picked the tennis racket up in 15 years because she said it's just like it's what I did to get an education, and I liked it, and it blew my hip out and hurt like hell. And then there just comes a point where I don't want to do that anymore because it's all I did all day. I want to go live. I want to go to the beach. I want to do all the other stuff that the kids in Southern California were doing,
Well, in the case of Lochte or Phelps, you've got some options, because you've made money from endorsement. You could potentially coach. If you're designed to coach or something you want to do, maybe that's something they do. I'm sure that NBC 4 years from now, if Ryan Lochte and or Michael Phelps made themselves available, as much as they love Rowdy Gaines and they love him as a swimming analyst, I'm sure they wouldn't mind having either or both of those guys in the booth with them, even part of the Olympics. Well,
Lochte's not that guy anymore, right? Lochte kind of sort of cost him.
Well, but see, that kind of publicity of having him in there is people will tune in to watch him. To see
there's always a second act, right? It's America, right?
It's right. It's everybody gets a second act, and he's just this big sort of. He's an overgrown, and I hate to use this term just because I think there are some negative connotations to it. But he's more of a lax bro. We used to call some lacrosse guys that sort of acted that way. That was basically a frat guy, and that's really what Ryan Lochte is. He's an overgrown frat boy in a lot of ways, and hasn't changed. So
I called it douchey. I think that's a fine non-FCC, and if you're offended by douchey, well, then you've never met one.
Yeah,
so.
I'm not going to disagree with that term. But these guys are going to go back, and if they've been smart with their money, if they've been smart with their public appearances, or if they're doing swimming competitions or other places where they get appearance fees and all that. I mean, if they've managed their money well, they'll be okay. But they've lived, as you mentioned, and I think any of us have worked in sports understand this. There's a bubble in sports. And the size of the bubble depends on how high up on the food chain you are. Guys like Michael Jordan were at the highest part of the food chain, so the bubble was extremely big. Now, that bubble's smaller for Michael as an owner in Charlotte, but that bubble's still there. That bubble will always be there for Michael Phelps, and unfortunately, he had to grow up in full view of the world. And
yeah, I mean, Cal Ripken gets divorced. It's news that day, and it's not good news. You know what I mean? And their real lives have to play out where they're not batting 4 or 5 times every night, or hitting jumpers, or swimming for medals. And the psychology of it, I guess it's a box of chocolates, right? Some people are very well adjusted to it. I'm sure if I said to you, name the top 10 people you've ever met in sports, you would give me 10 really well adjusted, really sort of cool. I ran into Trevor Price the other night. Wonderful wife. She's an attorney. I mean, kids are here. They live. You find these athletes that seem to be doing okay afterward and like living a intelligent, sane sort of. And then you hear the other down in luck, and a lot of times you look at it and say a lot of it really is about how they came into it and how they reacted to all of their career, and were they doing the right things during all of that. Clearly, Ryan Lochte was out getting hammered, making an ass of himself at 4:30 in the morning in Rio anyway. That unto itself, it's a pox on the U.S. House, quite frankly. It's an embarrassment.
It is.
It was like the hockey team a couple – remember the U.S. hockey team ripped
I remember
up?
that.
Oh, my God. It was a disgrace. International disgrace.
And a lot of times these guys, especially these single sport athletes, and in some cases football players too, they've got a group of people around them that sort of clean up the messes and make sure the stuff doesn't get to the media.
But in the modern era with the social media, it's different now. I mean, Phelps found that out when he was doing the bong hit, which, that's going on throughout the country. That's going on in Colorado. It's going on throughout the NFL. But he got through that. He got through the next year, and now he's back on top of the world. You have a second act. Hell, Phelps has had 4 acts, right?
Yep, and potentially, and I'm not convinced he doesn't try again in 2020, even in a limited program. I think the lure of the pool and the lure of doing what he's
what else is he going to do? I guess that's my point with this. What else are these guys going to do? And we've found out, when Phelps has gotten bored, right? He's gotten into trouble. I mean, and you know that from the athlete side as much as anything. The more these coaches can keep these guys around, the less trouble they can get into because they're focused on something productive instead of something. And I thought Andrew Brandt wrote a great piece at the MMQB about Trent Richardson. I don't know if you caught that or not. If you haven't, go out and Google it. Just about, guys, idle time. Idle time when all you've done is swim. You get out of the pool. What do you do with yourself, right?
Yeah, and I'm hoping, and again, the narratives are too easy. These guys are swimmers and heroes, and they're medalists for their country. They become these Olympic heroes, but just like anybody else,
I got a hero. We're going to Germany in 2 weeks. Guy saved my wife's life. That's a hero.
That is a hero. But I'm saying in terms of the narrative. And so you forget, or people forget, that these guys have real lives, real problems, real situations that they're dealing with just like everyone else
And
does.
they don't deal with those problems the same way they deal with swimming fast.
That's right.
What they do is swim fast. We sometimes we lose sight of that when we wrap red, white, and blue around it. Mommy's crying. They swim fast. Any other expectation put upon them is something that they've either gravitated toward in society because they're grown-ass men, or it's something that they've never had to have been subjected to because, as you said, somebody's always been there to be a pillow for that.
That's right, and hopefully, and that with his fiance and Boomer's little baby, that Michael finds what it will take to fulfill him once the cheering is stopped, once the medals will stop being awarded. And that's no different than an NFL player being called to an office on a Tuesday in week 6 has said, you're done. We appreciate what you're doing, but we're moving on, and you're cut, and your career's over, basically.
Yeah, nobody likes to cut themselves, right?
Right. No one will cut themselves, but eventually that time's going to come for all of them. And so, what happens when the cheering stops? What's the next move? What have you done? And that's the one thing we don't know. What have some of these guys done in their off time to prepare themselves beyond their sport, beyond their time in the limelight? And how do you best leverage that? And Phelps could very well become a long-term spokesman for Under Armour, a corporate spokesman. Will probably make a lot of money doing speeches across the country for the next couple of years. If he plays it right, he could make himself a really good living just doing that if he wanted to, and make appearances at swimming meets and work with kids, which I think he genuinely enjoys doing. I think it's the one genuine thing that Michael Phelps always seemed to be is he's always genuine around kids and children. Adults, not so much from everything I've read and heard, but around kids, he's been great. And I think you can find ways of doing that, plus do speeches and some of the other things that capitalize on his fame, but also maybe give a message of, hey, I had to grow up. This is the stuff I did. I was dumb. And this is what I needed to do in order to grow up and be a better human. And I think that's a message that can resonate with a lot of people. And so maybe that's what he does. A lot of former athletes have gone down that road. But
we'll turn the Ryan Lochte thing into a teaching moment, right, Chris?
Yeah, and it is. And the question is, will Ryan Lochte learn those lessons? Because he hasn't really shown that he's not anything more than a party guy outside of the pool. And at some point, the party has to end, and you're no longer an Olympian or longer Olympian medalist. And what do you do from there? So, for him, especially throwing his boys under the bus and doing the stuff that came of this. It's a difficult situation, but one that I'm sure he and his lawyer and USOC and others are going to try to figure out how best to position this and try to move on as quickly as possible as we go on to the next scandal or the next situation or the next thing that comes up that gets everybody up in arms.
Chris Pica, one of our media analysts here, and taking a look at the Ryan Lochte and the Olympic situation. Chris, I'll tell you what, man, we'll talk more about NFL preseason and MLB attendance and more Olympic stuff at another time down the line. But hang in there this summer. I know you're trying to beat that Georgia Heat down there, and we'll be getting together at some point here. I'll ship you some crab cakes or something if you don't get up here, man.
That sounds great, Nestor. I appreciate it and always appreciate the time.
You are Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. He is Chris Pike, our longtime friend, WNST contributor, talking all things Olympics and Lochte, amongst other things. I can be reached, nasty, at WNST.net 24 hours a day from anywhere. Complaints, criticism. I prefer praise. Thank you very much. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook Live, and our WNSTV YouTube channel, as well as our morning newspaper, which is all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Very easy to do. Also, any breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. You'll get that first from Luke, and it's all brought to you by Coonsford of Security Boulevard. All right. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.